Hey, this is Jacob from Crowdfunding Nerds, and what we're tuning into today is an episode where we get into a discussion on goal setting. How do we set realistic goals? How do we measure achieving those goals? And what steps can we do to improve ourselves to make sure that we don't abandon ship when our progress gets difficult? Let's get into it.
Game, begin.
Let's go.
Go back to the shadow. You shall not fail. Crowdfunding Nerds.
Amazing.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another awesome episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. I'm your host, Andrew Lowen, and I am joined, as always, by Sean, and not Rick. Instead, Rick is replaced by Jacob, who is on our team. Welcome to the show, Jacob.
Hey, thanks for having me back on.
And welcome back, Sean.
Hey.
So on this podcast, we really wanted to get into goals. And so, really on our last podcast, we kind of talked, it's the new year and everything. And we just kind of happened to dive into a little sub talk about goals. And I thought, why not have a full podcast about setting goals and how to make them meaningful, how to make them relevant, how to make them, et cetera, what things matter in regard to goals and goal setting. And that's going to be different for, we have three of us on this podcast. I think that the three of us, because we're three different humans, are going to have three different perspectives on this and three different sets of goals that matter. So, I think that y'all are in for a treat, but because we're recording this basically live, I have no idea what we're about to say. So, Sean, I tried to frame our conversation, but do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think it's really important when setting goals is to find a vacant field and make sure that there's no one running about, and then just make sure you have really sturdy poles so that when you
are you talking about European
you also
football?
Depend on the sport, right? Are you playing soccer or is it American football? So having clearly
I was
defined goals.
Really listening for a second. I'm like, okay, fine. I don't know why you find a field. I guess he's Irish, so maybe that's how they do it. Like, dang it, he's trolling me. He's just trolling me. So.
But no, I think goal setting is important because it gives you focus. And we talked in the previous episode of discipline and setting routines, and it increases your productivity. I think if you don't have at least something that you're shooting for, then you can kind of just aimlessly wander through life. So having a roadmap to get somewhere that is going to improve your life somehow, and it doesn't have to be even business related. I know we're going to talk about our own personal goals. One of our personal, because I've just recently sat down and done this with my wife. One of our personal goals as a family is just to host more. So we want to try and have a family from our church over at least once a month. It's kind of a small goal, but we've got a sort of a bigger place now. We can accommodate people, and this is just something we want to do. So it's not necessarily financially motivated. It's just something that we want to aspire and do, and it kind of gives us focus. And then in 6 months, we can say, okay, how many families did we have over? And if it isn't 6, then we failed our goal.
But, and then what is your punishment?
Oh, we didn't set punishment. The punishment is just the sense of failure that you get from failing at something.
I find even when you fail a goal, like I think the saying goes, you shoot for the stars, you hit the moon or something like that, or you hit the sun. I don't know. It sounds like a terrible thing to hit the sun, but the concept is that even if you only hosted 4 families or something, that's something that you did because you set a goal. It ended up that you didn't get there all the way, but that's still progress and actually is something to celebrate. And then, I also find one thing I'll mention is when you set a goal, you actually begin to find if it's meaningful to you or not. And this is actually kind of unlocking this hidden, tons of post-traumatic stress from actually starting my business and trying to make it. There was the first meaningful goal to me, and we'll talk about relevance. But the first goal to me that actually had meaning, I hope my mom's not listening, was to to prove to my mom that I didn't make a mistake by starting a business. That was actually the first goal that really carried weight with me. I had goals of I want to make 6 figures in 2 years, and and whatever. And I found that I'm actually not super motivated by money. And so that goal didn't really feel close to my heart. Now, there are other people that are very much motivated by money, motivated by, altruism, motivated by other things. We can talk about motivators as well, but the first goal that actually had meaning to me was to prove my mom wrong. And then the second goal was to feed myself. So I learned that it was really, really hard to run a business, and I quit everything and started my business, and that was tough. And then the next meaningful goal for me at that time was I just saw how my wife was working so hard. She worked as in two different places, but one was as an activities attendant at like a resort. And then she worked and this is after she got her college degree, she went and made like $9 an hour or $10 an hour as an activities attendant because we couldn't find like that entry level college job. We were just struggling, And then after that, she actually ended up working as an assistant director at a preschool. And I saw her leave at 5 a.m. and she would return at 4 p.m, totally exhausted, completely devoid of the ability to have a conversation because she's just spent all her mental energy at work. And my goal became, I'm going to get her to quit her job, and I'm going to work hard so that if I make, at the time it was like $4,000 a month, I can get her to quit her job. So that's what I'm going to do. And it was extremely meaningful to me. So I guess in regard to meaning, we'll talk about SMART goals and relevance later, but what do you think, Jacob? Like, as far as ascribing meaning to your goals, what makes a goal meaningful to you?
I think in a lot of ways it maybe ties into what improves your current quality of life, whether that is mentally, spiritually, maybe it's financially. But what I think can you ascribe some value to is it improving your current state? Is it something that's stretching you to learn a new skill or to better yourself? And if it's not doing those things, then maybe it's not necessarily a great goal. I mean, it could be one of those things like right now, some goals seem silly. Like I grew up playing basketball. And I mean, if I were to set a goal this year that I was like, I want to, at 38 years old, learn how to dunk a basketball. While that might be great for my personal pride, it really overall is not adding a whole lot to my life and my family life or, our direction. So that might be a little bit more of a futile kind of a goal. So I think overall as a goal worthwhile would be, what can you assess some value to improve your overall current state?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Sean, what makes a goal meaningful to you? Like what motivates you to, set goals like bringing more families over or something like that?
Yeah, well, I think as Jacob said, I completely agree with what he laid forth. I think for us, that particular one is just to make sure, like one thing that my wife and myself sort of known as self-reflection as millennials, I think, and because of our social media age, we're not very good at socializing with people face to face. So it was just a way to motivate us to get out of our comfort zone and be hospitable to people around us. Actually go over to the neighbor, like our neighbor just had a baby, instead of just ignoring that, like go over. And it's almost like a way to force us to be a bit more human and disconnected. So I think in terms of quality of life, I think that's certainly part of it. Now that's just one of the goals we both were able to define 3. I think one of our common goals that was a bit more financially connected was saving to get a new car. So we want to, our family's growing, my kids are growing, they're kind of squished in the back of our car. Even though I don't drive around too much, they're getting bigger. The car issue is going to become a problem. So that's one of our goals, is to save so that we can sell our current car, and then with the savings that we have, purchase a bigger car. So that's one that we have. We have different ones, but yeah, I think it all comes down to quality of life things. And it also reminds you of the reasons why you're grinding, why you're working. It's to provide, quality of life enhancements, not just to yourself, but also to those around you. which could be your neighbors, it could be your family, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Let's talk about what makes a goal, what makes an effective goal, how eventually we'll talk about how to come up with goals and other things like that. But there's this concept called the SMART goal. SMART goals are, so SMART is an acronym. It stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely, or I think time bound. And if a goal is all of these things, it is a thing that I would just say it's a thing that you can achieve that matters. And so let's just dive through each one of these. Let's start with specific. What makes a goal specific?
Well, I suppose I'll jump in. I think in terms of being specific, you kind of want to avoid the goals which are a bit waffly. It's like, I want to get better at painting. It's just like, well, if it's like, oh no, I want to
forge a Monet.
I want to start a Fiverr account and get my first client painting model miniatures and raise, $100 in my first month doing that. That's my goal. So it's specific. It's measurable. You can actually attain and achieve that. You can actually say, yes, after a month, I hit that, or I didn't hit that, or I got 50% of the way there. So I think that's in terms of being specific. Instead of saying, I want to get better at painting, it's like, well, I want to get better at painting model miniatures to achieve this outcome that is somehow actually recordable and attainable.
For sure. Yeah. Some sort of quantifiable aspect. Cause I think even with, like you mentioning the painting thing, just as my art background, it's it's one of those things that I think saying I want to get better at painting is so broad in general that there's not really any way to measure that. Like what makes up better in your mind? It might be better with a goal like that with painting to even say like, I want to produce 10 paintings, this year, or, I want to paint 15 models in the next 6 months. So while that doesn't necessarily directly say, hey, I want to make myself a better painter, it's one of those things that if you set a quantifiable goal as you continue to practice and knock those things out, by the end of those 15 models or 10 paintings, most likely you will be a better painter, just as that experience kind of comes into play. So I think being able to set some sort of easily quantifiable goal to get yourself moving is what kind of changes it from being something broad and waffly to something that at least gives you a target to shoot at.
Yeah. And I think that, for me, there's a difference between, so wanting to become a better painter is a great goal. If I were to add to the SMART acronym, I would actually add M for motivation, because the motivation behind a goal is, for example, like becoming a better painter. That is an excellent motivation. I want to be a better painter. And so how are you going to set a goal that will help you become a better painter? That's where you get specific. So you kind of start to drill down into, okay, what do I want to paint? I want to paint miniatures. I want to paint my own set of, these Deliverance Angel miniatures and have them look really good so that when people play with them on the table, they're like, oh, wow, good job, or maybe I personally I want to be personally proud of them. So what I'm going to do for that is I'll buy a set of paints. I'll start with my Lord of the Rings Journeys to Middle Earth minis that are just sitting gray and unwashed. And then I'll get my kind of the bumps in the road. Like we'll smooth out my skill set a little bit by the time I finish that. Then I'll be ready to paint these things. So I think motivation is key. And definitely shouldn't be under, I guess it should be kind of the foundation, but maybe those listening separate the motivation from how specifically are you going to tackle that. And I think that's kind of how it works for me. So measurable, I think, is really important as well. If something is, going back to that motivation versus a specific thing, becoming a better painter has no end time. Like you could be, as I mentioned before, Monet, and want to be a better painter. He's reached the height of as much as you can reach, and now he's long past. But yeah, he could easily set that as a motivation. In fact, I bet it's one of his life goals to be the best painter he can possibly be. But I think that one of the keys in goals is that you can say, did I do it? And the answer can be yes or no, or I got this far, or I got this close. I think that's a really important part about goals, is like reflecting back. If we set a goal and then never reflect back on how we did or how close we came or that kind of thing, I think that that's a, I don't know, it's not really, it wasn't really important to you, maybe. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. The motivation side of things is a big one. I think for me, like some of the stuff I think about too, when it comes to the motivation, this is maybe kind of stretching the topic a little bit, but while some of us I think are great self-motivators, I think part of it comes into as well with any goal is who's going to keep you accountable or push you. A lot of times I think for myself, it's having that motivation sometimes comes from an outside stimulus who is kind of going through and working on a similar goal. Or in the case of like family goals that we have, that my wife is also working at those same goals, and that becoming a motivator to continue to press into something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, some motivations could actually, motivation is one of those things which can be very useful, but there's an element of it where it can become actually quite dangerous. It always reminds me of, I don't know if you've seen Star Wars Rogue One.
Yeah.
And you have this one general guy and he's trying to find out chase down this rogue, engineer who's hitting a death blow to the Star Destroyer that they have, or whatever, the Death Star. And, there's a scene where he meets, Darth Vader. And Darth Vader essentially, chokes him and says, make sure you don't choke on your aspirations. I think it's a good reminder that some people their aspirations can be so, self-consuming that it can actually become dangerous to their productivity and dangerous to their family or something else. So that's why I think the motivations are good if there's sort of checks and balances there that can keep them, sensible.
Right.
So that you're not, burning the candle at both ends and having a nervous breakdown because you're trying to meet this arbitrary goal. And this is why I think the identifying what's driving you and driving those motivations is probably the first thing. I know we'd say we'd come back to this, but it's probably the first thing you have to start with. And that's going to be able to help you define and clarify your goals so that you do have the correct motivation. So it's really been doing something even before you think about goal setting. You almost have to think first about goal identifiers and general motivations and the reasons why you want to achieve those things. And then you can start narrowing in on goals. So if we were to sort of contextualize this for a crowdfunding event, it's yes, I want to launch my my campaign on Kickstarter in April, and I want to raise this much money. And then, but before you have that goal, you need to first go back. Why do you want to do that? Is it because you want to be self-employed? Is it because you just have a desire to get this game out and you're kind of frustrated that this game doesn't exist and you just really want it in the hobby space? All of those kind of preconditions is going to greatly alter your decisions moving forward and your motivations and how much time you put into something. So I think all those are important because, there is a danger, right? To overworking or just being, and we've seen this, people who have motivations and they kind of step on everybody and burn bridges just so that they can move forward and ahead. And I think that can be quite dangerous as well.
Right. In fact, actually, we had, this was I want to say like 2 years ago, but we had Kirk Dennison on our podcast, and he's he actually is a logistics expert, works for Thunderworks, and he's been very open and vulnerable on both our podcast as well as the Board Game Design Lab podcast in regard to mental health. And he went through a serious depression, and this isn't like me, saying anything that's not already out there. I know that he would want as many people to be helped by this as possible, which is why he made it public in the first place. But he talked about how his goal was to go full time as a board game publisher. He had a really great game called Rurik, Dawn of Kiev. And he went, he figured out, if I could make $300,000, then I could make a career out of this, quit my job and go full time. He wasn't, I think part of, you don't need to know every single thing before you start on a goal. But this actually was rather unhealthy, because it was like, he wasn't quite sure why. And, wasn't quite sure why he really, really wanted to go full time. And, you would naturally think, well, he wants to go full time to be a board game publisher because that's his passion and that kind of thing. Well, he ended up not achieving that goal, and he ended up making over 200,000, but it wasn't enough to, quit and go full time. It was enough to do very well as like a side income and be a publisher and that sort of thing. But it really it sent him into a huge spiral of depression. And he was shared with us that he would have a hard time like talking to family at family gatherings, and he would really kind of in some ways it was just very difficult on his personal life. And what he realized was that his goal was that because he wanted to have like a major life change in his career. And so he ended up doing that, and kind of figuring out and getting help in various ways, but finding out that that's was the problem. He felt stuck. He just felt stuck in life, and he wanted to do something different. And then when he identified the real motivator, rather maybe I guess the reason that he would make a goal like that, he was actually able to set a specific goal that was able to accomplish what he wanted, and it helped kind of change his life around. He is certainly, from my dealings with him, he seems like a totally changed human, and he's actually, it's just a really cool like success story in regard to, popular term nowadays, mental health. It's I think that goals, like setting a goal that, if you do not achieve that goal, sends you into a downward spiral. There might be actually something else that's underlying as like a motivator that you might benefit from figuring out why, So certainly a goal that, should be achievable, which is another part of this whole SMART goals, thing. Being able to, like, if it's realistic, the goal needs to be realistic. Like, it needs to be possible. For me, if I was like, I want to become the number one game in the entire world, bigger than Monopoly, to me, that just sounds a little, unrealistic. And it's not, I mean, I guess it's specific, but, I guess I would need to sell, more than $100 million a year of my game in order to do that. And it just doesn't seem very realistic. If I add a time to it, it's like, I'm going to give myself 5 years. It just still doesn't seem very realistic. So I think that, making sure that these are possible to achieve, is very important, but also even, looking at, reflecting on Kirk's goal that he had shared, with Rurik, it was achievable. He ended up not hitting the goal, but I would say that just based on his experience and what he shared with us, making sure that you identify kind of that underlying root cause of why this goal is important to you is a real key in this whole process. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about that.
Sure.
Yeah, one thing I think of is, because I know you asked earlier if one of my personal goals, what's the consequence if you don't reach it? I suppose there's an element with goal setting. I've been thinking about this just in terms of work, to get a little bit philosophical. There's often said that it's not just about the destination, it's not about the journey, it's not about the end. I'm butchering the quote. It's not about
the destination, it's about the journey. Yeah.
I think work is the same. It's not always about the outcome. And you want positive outcomes. You want to be rewarded for your labors. But I think there's an element of work that is actually therapeutic. There's an element of work work is just good for you. It's good to work. It's good to work hard. It's good to be disciplined. These things shape your character. I did a lot of work with like youth in the past, and you could always tell the kids who were given everything in life, because you could tell by the way they walk. They walk as if they've got not a care in the world. Also, you can tell the kids who maybe had a bit of a harder background, they're a bit more studious. You can kind of tell just by the way they walk and the way they present themselves that they've been through some things, and that there's things at stake. Like if they don't succeed at this, there's going to be consequences. So you can see that they're studious, they work hard, they do things well. Other kids are just sort of, flopping about as they walk down the street. And I think it's this idea that work actually fashions your character. And I think people can see that in other people. You can see people who've sort of learned to discipline themselves, set goals, work hard. It changes their character in a very positive way. I think when done correctly, then those who maybe don't have certain motivations and don't set goals and kind of just go through life. So I think there's an element where, yes, it's good to achieve the goals you set, but even if you don't achieve them, I think even striving to achieve them is going to have a positive impact on your life, because it's going to shape your character in a positive way, which might lead to some other positive goal being attained down the road that isn't really connected to your personal goal right now. So keeping that in mind, I think, is also possible. It's also important.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think with to piggyback on that, you were talking about like some of your motivations and stuff too, and being able to kind of identify what your motivations are for doing a certain thing. I think if your motivations are off, then a lot of times your goal doesn't necessarily become a goal; it becomes an obsession. And I think there's a distinct difference between a goal and an obsession, in the sense that, like you're saying, Sean, if you're pursuing a meaningful goal, even if you fall short of it, usually the pursuit of that goal leads to betterment in other areas. Like you're doing, if you're wanting to, meet with other families and things like that, like even if you don't necessarily achieve the goal, the motivation to do it is something that will produce lasting benefits, regardless of whether you successfully have 6 people over in 6 months. And I think that's kind of an important thing to note, because if you don't have a solid motivation for doing something, and that thing becomes an obsession, part of the earmark of an obsession is that you're sacrificing a lot of other things to pursue that particular obsession. And it almost never is meaningful things, that you're, it usually is meaningful things that you're sacrificing to pursue that. Your other interests, or the other parts that are good and worth pursuing, oftentimes suffer. Same with work. Like if your motivation is like, I just want to do this, I want to work. Like a lot of times you end up sacrificing your family time or your mental health time. And those things then quickly, when you get to the end of it, like if you get to the end of that obsession, it kind of becomes one of those things where, well, what did it cost? And, part of it, to quote Thanos, it cost everything. And a lot of times it's not worthwhile.
I have this, in my past, I was a former professional gamer. I played Hearthstone, taught people how to hit legend, and, that would be a decent little side hustle alongside what I was currently doing for work. I mean, at the time, I started my business, and I would take money from anywhere, like it was really hard. And $400 a month was like a big deal, or $400 a week to just train people on how to hit legend. But I was super duper obsessed with gaming. And as anybody who's listened to this podcast for more than one episode knows, put a lot of hours into World of Warcraft. I put a lot of hours into Elder Scrolls games, Elder Scrolls Online, League of Legends, and tons and tons of others. And the pursuit, I've never been the type of guy that has gamed, like, I don't have a Steam account with 400 unplayed games. I have one game that I play, like the one that I play. It's like the equivalent, it would in the gaming world would be like a Magic player. The only thing that a Magic the Gathering player wants to talk about is Magic. The only game they want to play is Magic. And if you have anything else that's still pretty cool, it's not Magic, so that they're just, you're kind of, not that important. And that's the type of gamer that I was. So whatever game it was, I was like, I'm going to be the best in the world kind of thing. And so, I realized that was taking away, it was just causing me to be worse at everything else in life. And eventually, actually as October 1st, 2015, I ended up laying down video games and kind of quitting cold turkey. And, that's when, of course, I became a board game player and designer and all of that. And I found that obsession, it's like, it's not looking back and say, what did it cost me? But it's looking forward and say, what is it costing me? And looking around me and saying, what is it costing me now? Like when I sit and like, I'm working and like trying to do things, but also on my dual monitor, I have a game of Hearthstone open, on the right monitor, and just like whenever I have a turn, I'll play it. And then, I'll get back to, I'm working at the same time. I'm not really able to produce great work. It's like, try to write an email at the same time as doing something else. You're just not going to be very focused in your email. You're not going to be very focused in the other task. And both of them are going to get done slowly and very, poor quality. And in the end, what I learned was when I would play, so I would, play because I had to be good because I was teaching others and everything like that. So I had to know what's relevant. But at the end of the day, like if I had work that still needed to be done, the desire to feed oneself is so powerful. In the end, the thing that suffered was my family. I wouldn't be able to hang out with them. I'd be working till 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the evening. And they didn't know why, like I'm upstairs in the office or whatever in my office is now downstairs. But they wouldn't know why I have to work late, and they would do their best to accommodate me. And, for a time actually this was around like 2012, 2013, 2014. They were just like, okay, if Andrew says 10 minutes, it's going to be an hour. It's called Andrew time. And it's become a phrase around here. If I say 5 minutes, it's going to take me 15. But the question is, am I doing what is meaningful, or am I just not, for me, I want to give the best case scenario in all cases. So whenever you guys hear time from me, it's like, this is the best case scenario, and it never works that way.
You do well in Ireland.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I think that the big challenge is, when everybody else wants to, everybody that loves you wants to make excuses for you and say, hey, that's just, it's okay. We'll make it work. And, Andrew's just going to be at dinner. I'll just keep the dinner in a tin for him so that he can warm it up later. What am I missing? I've got family that loves me, that wants to see me. I've got, at the time I had, two children. Well, one child, another one on the way. Was born in, early 2015. So, and I was missing out on that. So what was I missing? It was, in the end, time with the family. And then also I would have to sacrifice working late. I wouldn't be able to go to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which I really, really liked. And I found that when I actually decided to lay down video games, lay down my obsession, like you were talking about, Jacob, I became a lot better at everything else that remained. A lot better. I had a lot more time for jiu-jitsu. I had a lot more time for family, which is good because I have so many kids now. I have to be very efficient. And it just made me happier. I really was so much happier after laying it down. Just strange to say. I know a lot of people listening to this are just going to be gamers, right? But that was an example in my life. I was very obsessed and just in an unhealthy way, and I couldn't control it, So
I think for people listening to this, and if they struggle with something similar, playing lots of video games, I think that the key is to think, what positives have you learned from gaming and how can they apply to other areas of your life? So I'm sure there's elements of gaming in terms of problem solving, which you can transcend, you can translate over to business, in terms of troubleshooting things, data analysis or something like that. So I think
I made a board game that feels like all the video games I've ever played that I loved. I was able to kind of leverage that knowledge. So, that's turned into a successful thing. So I have been able to parlay knowledge. Also my spelling skill. Like I have played a lot of JRPGs and I know how to spell big words, because I know how to read them. I read them. Right? So, so it does have skills that it adds.
So there are things that can be, you can redeem the time, so to speak, and take some elements. If you think that, okay, it was misplaced time because I had an obsession, even in that, there's probably something that you can draw out of it and bring it to something that is more productive.
Yeah. And, and in a funny related way, the phrase relevant, I guess that could be, meaningful or motivational, that kind of the SMART goals relevance. The one thing that maybe I would encourage folks, because if you're suffering like I did from an obsession, one of the things you're probably doing is beating yourself up when you fail. And, just like, I did it again. For me, my wife would leave, for work and I would have to make, my goal early on in business. I had to make 50 cold calls every day on the phone to a local business, to try to sell them a website. And that was really hard to do. I do not like making cold calls and I'm not good at it. And there are people out there that make like 300 a day. I just don't have the brain power to do that. But sometimes I would make one call, get somebody that like a secretary is like, no, we're not interested, and hang up. And I just got my feelings hurt. And picking up the phone again was like £1,000,000. I could just not pick it up again. And I put on my headphones and I played Elder Scrolls Oblivion or whatever for 8 hours. And then all of a sudden I hear my wife like walking up the stairs. We lived in a little 2-story apartment, condo, and on the second story of this building. And I could, these stairs were like metal and you could hear somebody walking up, and I just ripped off my headphones, closed the game as quick as I could, like made it look like I was working. And then I, internally, and, my wife would say, hi, honey. And I give me a kiss when she came home. And internally, I was like really kind of devastated about my own performance. I failed myself. I failed my family. I didn't accomplish what I wanted to do that day. And I put myself a day behind because my behavior was just, my obsession kind of got the better of me. And, I think that a really, really important thing that I figured out was I need to forgive myself for things like that. Like quickly, I need to have, I think the phrase, it might've been Tom Brady or, just a famous quarterback. I can't remember at this point, but somebody said, ask the question to this person, what's the most, effective tool that you have as a quarterback? And the response was, the memory of a goldfish. A goldfish, was rumored at least to have a memory that lasts only 10 seconds. The short-term memory of a goldfish is supposedly 10 seconds long. And when the quarterback gets sacked and loses yards or whatever, and there's a turnover and it's a terrible thing. Like if you want to be good at this game and you want to win, like you have to forget that happened and perform your best the next time you're out. And I think that is the same in business. We can't let those things that are failures, because especially if you're trying hard, you're going to experience failures and they're going to be meaningful to you. I failed on this and it hurts. I think really, really important to just like forgive yourself, move on, do better the next day or work better now. Tony Robbins says that the best time to plant a tree was 30 years ago. And the next best time is like right now. So it's today. So I think the same is true with goals. So
plant a tree that doesn't bear fruit.
Yeah. And actually, speaking of that, I mean, the last thing here in the SMART goals is time bound. You have to have a time that you attach to the goal. Like I don't know, Jacob, like you like to lift. Do you have goals related to lifting?
I do. I probably don't set quite as many as I used to because I don't I've had to cut down my lifting routine a lot more, just with more kids and other things. But I do maintain several lifting goals that I try to shoot for. Yeah.
Lift the kids. They love it.
Yeah.
That's my workout.
Right. Body strength. They're like little kettlebells.
But I think they do say when you become a dad, you gain like 15 overall pounds of strength from the amount of things that you have to pick up.
What? That's awesome.
So
I'm thinking of like the Pokemon stat counter, like
exactly.
strength is a 5, dad strength. That's awesome.
But no, I do keep goals. And I think that's one of those things a lot of the goals, there's been a few of them that I didn't necessarily hit the time. But it's like I'd had set goals. Like I wanted to lift a certain amount of weight by the time I hit 30. And I got really, really close and I injured myself like right before my 30th birthday and missed my goal by 5 pounds. Oh. And it took me like a year and a half to rehab my shoulder to the point that I could rebuild that strength. But it was one of those things that, like, even though the time kind of got messed with, it then still kind of stayed right at the forefront of my mind that it was like, hey, you've still got to push forward to this. You may be delayed a little bit, but continue to keep pushing at it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll say that, so for me, I have a weight loss goal. So, now that I have child number 7 in my mind, I'm not going to have any more children. So now it's time to, who knows what the future holds, but, my goal is to get back to like a healthy walk around weight that, where like what I find is, so right now, when I started, I weighed 206.2 pounds and, my right now, and as of this morning, I hit like 198.9. It was my weight this morning. And, and I just started after the holidays. So it's been a couple of weeks and the water weight has been, getting, I'm losing weight faster. I know that I'll lose weight slower, but I don't really have a time. I have a goal. My goal is, I want to hit 170 pounds in the morning. So when I wake up, I want to be between 170 and 175. And we'll see how realistic that ends up being down the road. But I'm okay allowing that, that's just my goal. But as we get closer, maybe it's, 180, 175 to 180. Maybe I put on more muscle mass and it just doesn't make sense for my body. Maybe I look better in the mirror and feel good at this certain weight. So I think it's always important to have the, to not be so rigid and like, no, 170 was my goal. It's like, be okay with amending your goals, like as you are, finding out what's meaningful or, as you kind of are on this journey. But, because really like the motivation is to be healthy and have energy. I think that's one of the keys for me is like, I just find that, when I'm between like 170 and 180, I have so much energy when I wake up. I am ready for my kids. I am not just tired and everything. I'm just like, when I'm sitting on the couch and somebody's like, oh, I need a thing. It's not a problem for me to actually get up and do it. Right now I'm commanding my children like a battlefield commander, like, all right, go find the remote, Eden, Faith, go get me a snack. And it's, just because I'm trying to like, parcel out my energy usage for the day. It's just, it requires more energy to move when I'm 200 pounds, and so, I think that the goal, over time is for me, I want to lose a pound a week. Yeah. On average, like an average pound, like 1 pound a week. If it ends up that I'm losing 0.75 or 1.1 or whatever, that's okay. But at the end of the day, I want to be relatively, let's just keep it like 175. So I think that the process and like the daily steps and everything like that, and also the time is not rigid on this goal. I'm not saying, but there are people that do, like a bride getting married might have a goal to fit in a particular wedding dress or to lose a certain amount of weight for themselves by that date. And that's a lot more rigid. But for me, I just want to be healthy and have energy and that kind of thing. Also, I want to be able to do flying arm bars in Brazilian jiu-jitsu and stuff like that. I legitimately like to do flying arm bars. But
all I'm thinking is like you rip someone's arm off and throw it at someone. My arm on.
yeah. So
Rip both their arms off and start hitting them with their arms.
Yeah.
I do have a few on my wall, a few of my opponent's arms on my wall that I took home as a trophy. But anyway, so it's just trying to make it meaningful and time bound and all that. That's just something that is kind of close to my heart.
For sure. And I think it kind of is also helpful to have like almost even like micro goals within that time frame. Like you said, you want to get down to like 170 and you don't necessarily have an indefinite amount of time. And while that may be a lot of weight to try to lose, like when you're looking at the big goal, I think like you mentioned, like breaking it down smaller, like I want to try to lose
under 200.
Can I lose under a pound a week or whatever? Or maybe it's one of those things like, hey, because sometimes I think we get a little bit ambitious and we're like, hey, I'm going to lose 30 pounds this year. And then
watch an episode of Biggest Loser, you're like, 12 pounds sounds doable for me.
They can do that. They do that in one treadmill workout. But it's one of those things that I think sometimes it does creep up on us a little bit, that you get like halfway in and you're like, oh man, I'm not at that point. And then if you don't kind of have some of those like smaller goals to shoot for, I think it's easy to get discouraged and then abandon a goal because we almost write it off as it's not attainable. So being able to have some of those like smaller micro goals, I think even within a larger goal, does a lot to help keep you in a frame of mind where you maintain that motivation. Because if you hit a few of those other earmarks, even from a game design standpoint, if it's like, hey, I want to design a game by the end of this year, that may sound great, but if you don't have some of those micro goals, and maybe it's like, hey, well, I already figured out like the core mechanics, I figured out this sort of thing, then if you don't hit it within that year, you can at least look back at all of these smaller goals that you hit. And then it makes you less likely to abandon it, because it's easier to see like, look at what I've already sort of attained, or look at the work that I've already put in. And it allows you to kind of move the goalpost just a little bit, and it not be a major setback, and be able to maintain that level of motivation.
That's super true. There's this thing that I'm reminded of. There's a man, one of my mentors, and now since passed on, but his name is J.R. Reidinger, and he was actually the CEO of a company called Market America. They own a website called shop.com, and they're kind of like it's not exactly multi-level marketing, but might as well call it that for sake of ease, the whole pyramid scheme, but not sort of thing. That's actually where I got my start in selling websites. But the guy said the most important meeting is the next one, and that was just extremely, it was interesting to me. But from a philosophical point of view, yes, it is. The concept in a business like that is if you want to get people to sign up and start selling stuff and making money and all of that, you have to get them trained and you have to get them motivated and all of that. And that comes oftentimes, the bigger the training, the more motivating, the more encouraging it is. And the more it makes them want to do the work and all of that. So we would go to this big convention in Miami every year, and it was like amazing. It was like 25,000 people in this room that were all really, really excited. It was super motivating. But like when you got home, you had like a monthly meeting that was very small at a little hotel or something, and you're showing the business plan to people. It was just hilarious. Like I personally, I don't recommend doing one of these, but I will say it was like an MBA in how to run a business and how to work with people. And it taught me a lot. So, talking about things like that you can pull from failures, I pulled a lot from that venture. But the concept of like the next meeting is the most important one. It gave these micro goals, like you're saying, and I was actually able to parlay that knowledge into the development of Deliverance. The way that I would develop is like, I have this goal of going to Kickstarter and having success, and then releasing a big, a popular product, which we've achieved. But I didn't know exactly how I was able to get there. I didn't have the head knowledge for, how much money am I going to raise on Kickstarter? I didn't know. I just wanted to raise as much as possible, because the more that I raised, the bigger deal it meant for the game, and that kind of thing. So I would make my goals. I wouldn't set huge, had this kind of lofty, the big, hairy, audacious goal, which is like, doesn't seem achievable right now because I can't see the path to it, but I can see it in the distance and I'm just walking in that direction. Right. But my micro goals that were meaningful were, at the next convention that's coming up, which is in like 2 months, I'm going to have the prototype that I have it, it's going to be updated. All the errors from the last convention that everybody pointed out are going to be fixed so that I can see what new problems there are. I hate when, like one time I had to bring Deliverance to a convention, and then the next week I had another convention and there wasn't enough time to update the game. And everyone was like, oh, it just feels like I don't need to move in order to win this game. The best option is never to use my move action. And then I was like, oh, okay, that makes total sense. I have an idea for how to fix that. And then the next week I went to another convention and I got the same feedback, like, oh yeah, the move action. It's like, what would have happened if I just fixed that problem and then went to the convention? I would have actually been able to move forward. But because I didn't, I realized that I'm not going to stack conventions one week after the next, unless I can actually, make those changes. And so for me, it was like one convention every 1 to 3 months was what I needed in order to actually make those changes. And then finally I hit this convention. It's called GAMA, the Game Manufacturing Association's trade expo. And I had like this huge feedback that, this just kind of an epiphany, several epiphanies that made me realize I have a lot of work to do. I have to redesign every single card from the ground up because I eliminated dice rolling to see if you would hit. And I needed to redo the rule book. I needed to redo all the cards because it all was based on the chance that you could possibly miss. And so we did that. It took like 4 months before I went to another convention. And as soon as I did, everybody was like, I love this game. Where can I buy it? And that's when I knew, okay, I think we're ready to like prepare for Kickstarter now. So, which was a, kind of a journey in and of itself. And so I think that the next meeting being the most important one is a kind of a good way to help you break your goals down into more bite-sized pieces, And I know, Sean, you had this kind of process for doing that. You want to kind of share that?
Yeah, sure. I go into it. Yeah, I think because one thing with setting goals is you kind of want them to have somewhat attainable timeframes. You don't want to be like, here's my 10-year goal plan, where who can really see 10 years in the future. So I find having 6-month goals are fruitful because it's far enough out to be meaningful, but it's not so far out that you sort of just forget about it. And then I think reviewing your progress every 2 months can be fruitful. So, okay, well, how close are we? What are we going to do the next couple of months to further our goals? So yeah, I'll quickly go through this and I think we'll just include in the show notes so people can go into, we'll kind of briefly cover it here. And then people can actually like do a deep dive, themselves in the show notes when we pick this up. So first of all, it talks about setting up a goal identifier. And this is really to define your motivations for why you're even setting goals in the first place. So, now I've just sort of extrapolated this from a book I read a long time ago and sort of customized it to, make it more relevant for myself and my wife because we do this every 6 months. So the first section is to list 3 of the most meaningful things you have learned in the last year or the last 6 months. This can be helpful as it kind of grounds your future goal making and ideas, and also helps you to be reflective on how you've progressed since then. And then, think of 3 things that you're really good at. If you're to become the best in the world at these things, what would they be? So it's trying to help you focus on what you're good at and how can you narrow in on that. Then list your 6 top values, reasons behind your life choices. So again, helping you get these motivations. Why are you doing what you're doing? List 6 things you would do if you had $10 million in your bank account. So if money was no question, what would you be doing with your life? That's a good way to also help refine what you're doing. You kind of take money out of the equation for a second. And then the next part is setting your 6-month goal. So we got your motivations for doing what you're doing. Now we can, by keeping the idea of it being specific, achievable, and having limits, you can start setting your 6-month goals. So list the 6 goals you hope to achieve in the next 6 months. And then it says now list 3 goals for the next 90 days. These must be associated with the previous goals. And then it kind of breaks it into months. So month 1, list 3 things you're going to focus on to achieve your goals. month 2, what 3 things you're going to focus on to achieve in your second month, and then month 3, there's 3 more things. And then it goes on and says, what are your top 6 reasons for achieving these goals? And then now pick 3 of these reasons that mean the most to you. And at the end, those 3 last reasons are really why you're doing what you're doing. Those are your 6-month goals. So keeping the idea of it being specific, achievable, having time limits, if you fill out that questionnaire, you should have your 6-month goals laid out. We'll include a link in the show note. Well, not a link, but we'll just include all of those questions in the show notes for you so that you can avail of that, go through that on your own time. Take your time with it. I wouldn't say just rush through it. Really have a think through. Make sure that those 6-month goals are specific, achievable, and are meaningful to you. And I think that will be helpful for you in achieving your crowdfunding success.
Yeah. I love the way that you put it. When you're setting your 6-month goals, you list 6 goals you hope to achieve in the next 6 months. Then you break it down into, 3 goals in the next 90 days that are related. So if you accomplish the goals that you set in, that are for 90 days, you're going to get closer to accomplishing goals you have set in 6 months. Like I'm assuming for you, and then you break it down on, what are you going to do in month 1, month 2, month 3. So for you, Sean, to keep it simple, you have the goal of in the next 6 months to invite 6 families to your house and have fellowship and that kind of thing, get to know more people and whatnot. That means 1 family a month, right? And if you're meeting with 1 family a month, then you will achieve 3 families in 90 days. And then, if you continue doing that, you're going to achieve all 6 families in 6 months.
Yes.
I find that breaking things down into, for me, it's all about daily steps. Like what, taking my big, hairy, audacious goal is what I call it. And breaking it down into what will I do, what do I need to have done by the end of the year to reach this huge, ridiculous goal? And what, I have this ridiculous goal of turning Deliverance into a lifestyle game. How will I make it a lifestyle game in similar fashion to like Magic the Gathering or Warhammer or, something like that? And that's a big, hairy, audacious goal. So in the next year, what will I do? Well, I have to have my expansion campaign launched on Kickstarter. I have to have scenarios that come out every quarter for, for the player base. And then I have to have work on the next thing that's coming. That's going to be the, after the expansion, that's going to be kind of that big announcement of, hey, this could be a lifestyle game for you sort of thing. And then I can break that down into, okay, what am I going to do this, in the next, 6 months? I need to have everything ready for Kickstarter. What does that mean that I need by the next 90 days from now? I need to have the prototype ready to, for the expansion to send to a reviewer. What does that mean I need to do this month? And then what tasks do I need to accomplish each day to achieve that, that monthly goal? If I achieve the daily goals 30 times, I achieve the monthly goal. If I achieve the monthly goal 3 times, I achieve the quarterly goal, etc. And so for me, it was a long time ago. We talked about this. Episode 57, I looked it up. We talked about in our ultimate crowdfunding reading list, we talked about a book called Eat That Frog by Brian Tracy. And that's how I organize my daily goals. I set up 3 frogs and a frog represents like a difficult task that will move me forward, and I identify in the morning 3 of them. And by the end of the day, the only thing that I must do during my work hours are accomplish those 3 things. And other tasks are going to crop up, but I have to accomplish those 3. So it's one of those things that it makes it like, I don't know what it is. Realistic is the way that it is listed in SMART goals, but it feels like it makes it real to me when I have these 3 things. And oftentimes it's like 4:00 and I'm supposed to be done with work in an hour and I've only eaten one of those frogs. It's like, oh my goodness, I have to totally reshuffle what I'm doing because I have an hour left and I have to send that email to the client. It's really important. And I have to set up that ad campaign. Otherwise I'm in big trouble. And I need to work on those now and just turn everything else off, like Facebook, emails, other people asking me questions. I have to focus, and it helps me. Sometimes, you're not able to use all 8 hours in equal efficiency. But you'd be surprised at what work you can do when you identify the 3 things you need to accomplish, and then make sure by the end of the day that they're done.
I do the exact same thing. I structure my day task based in the morning, and I break it into 3 sections: morning, afternoon, evening. And then I prioritize them based on how important they are. And I tick them off. And if I don't get the things done in the morning, I then bring it down to the afternoon section. And then likewise, I bring it to the evening section. And if I don't do too much in the evening, I then bring it to the next day. And then the next day I review all those tasks again, and I update it throughout the day as well. Mm-hmm. So that's how I find it to be useful. Because then you're also putting time limits on them. And then it's also a way where you can, if new tasks do jump up, you can slot them in to your schedule accordingly and kind of know where you are. Mm-hmm. This a really good tool to do this is actually Google Tasks, because it actually connected to your Gmail account. So I can read an email and I say, okay, I need to jump on that, add it to my task, and then just drag it to the time of day where I'll actually address that, and I can come back to it. So that way it's in the back of my head and I know it's there. But then I've put in my schedule, my daily schedule, time to actually address that. So then I can kind of forget about it and get back to what I was doing, without me having to exert mental power of, oh yeah, I've got to get back to that email I just checked. Or because sometimes you have to check emails to make sure they're not urgent. It's like, oh, my account just blew up and I need your help right now. And well, otherwise it's like, oh, I can come back to this email from this client. It's not too urgent. And I've got this other thing that's more pressing right now.
Yep. That concept of the urgency and importance, graph. I think we talked about, I can't remember what podcast we talked about that on, but, urgency versus importance. Sometimes things are urgent and important and you better address those now. Other times things are urgent, but not very important, like to accomplish right now, as like taking a phone call from a number you don't recognize, or answering an email that, or like a mobile push notification. Like those things are urgent. If you don't look at them, they're going to kind of disappear off your radar. But they're not that important. Right. And so, the most important, rather in order to not use redundant words, the most critical things to accomplish to achieve your goals are oftentimes important, but not urgent. So the things that in order to achieve your goals, they'll wait for you, but eventually you look up, and look around you and you realize you're nowhere close to your goal because you were focusing on the urgent things, but not important things. So, anyway, Jacob, you want to have the last word on this podcast before we wrap up?
Oh man. I don't know what's
something really smart.
You guys are such wise sages. I think you put some of it into perspective too. Also, maybe just to add as an addition, because you were talking about like realistic. I think one of the things too is to also at the beginning of your goal setting is to take an honest assessment of what your current skills and abilities are to attain that goal. To set realistic leaps as you're making progress. I know, like, for example, you had brought up for me, because I do like to lift weights. And like part of my journey was like, when I graduated college, I couldn't bench press 100 pounds, which is ridiculous for I was 21 when I graduated college. So for a 21-year-old man to like just barely be able to, bench 100 pounds was pretty sad. So I was newly married and stuff like that. And so I had a motivation. I was like, I'm newly married. I want to look good for my wife, but I also want to feel like I could carry myself if I needed to. And I wanted to be healthy. And so I did start with like a goal where like my initial goal was I wanted to get up to bench my body weight. So I think at the time I weighed like 205 pounds. And so it was like I wanted to bench my body weight. And so I also knew I didn't necessarily set a definitive timeline to when I wanted to be able to do that, but I needed some way to give myself a goal to work towards. And part of that was I had a routine that a friend of mine had given me. He was a offensive lineman for football, and he was a huge dude. He was like 6'3" and weighed like 350 pounds, and he was massive. He almost knocked me unconscious. We had a fight at our campus ministry where we had a bunch of dudes that built forts out of couches and fought each other with pillows. And he hit me in the face with a pillow so hard that I literally blacked out on my feet. Like the room started spinning and my ears started ringing, and it was like someone had set off a concussion grenade. And he had this just super deep laugh that was just a ho ho ho, like Job of the Hutt.
It's the only thing that you heard.
Yeah. Oh, it was amazing. So, but anyway, he had set me up with a workout routine, and it was like it was 14 workouts. But he was like, we would do this with football. He was like, we would be lifting like sometimes 3 or 4 times a week, and we'd do this chart. But he was like, let's do something like realistic. He was like, can you commit to just lift twice a week? And do these sets twice a week. And then if you do that, you're kind of have a measured track for where you should be when you get to the end of that 14 workout routine. And so like for me, that made things so much more attainable because I was able to look at what my availability was. I was a high school teacher at the time. And I was really invested with my church. I worked at a comic book store on the weekends. Like I had a lot of stuff that was still occupying a lot of my time. But it was easy to be like, okay, I can carve out within my ability twice a week to be able to do this. And it gave me a really nice measured approach to fit within what I knew my abilities were. It was still something that stretched me. I had to commit the time to do it, but I knew it was feasible within my ability range. And so I was able to take those steps and then see, oh, hey, we got through, I did it twice a week. And then 7 weeks out, it was like, oh, whoa, I added 30 pounds to my bench press, like in that time frame. And it was like, oh, this is great. Like, this is definitely achievable. And so that series of being able to analyze what was realistic within my abilities while still stretching myself gave me something that was attainable to shoot for. I know that's kind of piggybacking on a couple of things we already said about micro goals and stuff like that. But I think being able to set that realistic expectation for what you can feasibly achieve within the timeframes that you have or within the limits that you may have based on other responsibilities is really important when you're setting a goal to make sure that you actually stick to it and achieve the goal that you want to.
Yep.
I think if you're completely unrealistic in what you think you can achieve, it's very easy to just.
Yep. Yeah. I would also add one last thing, and then I promise we'll conclude. But I figure, just based on what you guys have said, this is a really important note, is that when you aim to achieve your goals, expect to suffer. You'll suffer. Suffering is part of the I call it the grind. When you're grinding, it is not very fun. Like for me, in my weight goals, I am 38 years old. I cannot lose weight by working out really hard and eating whatever I want. Used to be able to, but now I can't. And if I want to lose weight, I have to also diet properly. So it's a matter of, being disciplined there. And I'll tell you what, there are some days where I just get so mad. I asked my wife last night, like we track our calories on this app called Lose It, and just generally track like what we eat. Which is helpful for me to see how well I'm doing. Sometimes, you end up accidentally starving yourself and don't realize it. Other times you are, like you ate a bunch of pizza for lunch and then you didn't realize how many calories that actually was. And it helps you to kind of see what it is that you're consuming. And I reached my calorie limit, and I asked my wife, I was like, honey, you think it'd be a big deal if I ate like 3 slices of pizza right now? I'm really hungry. And I was angry and kind of hangry and frustrated and that kind of thing, because when I'm not dieting, I would totally do that. I would have eaten those slices of pizza as an afternoon snack. And it is just one of those things that change is difficult, and it's painful. And it not only takes, achievable, realistic goals, let's say like micro goals, but it also takes, the difficult part is like changing habits. It causes suffering when you change habits. When you're used to doing things a certain way, you have to change, you'll suffer. And so we could probably do a whole episode about suffering and changing habits. That might be a fun podcast.
For suffering leads to the dark side.
So anyway, that'd be a fun one to do it down the road. Let's talk about suffering, everyone. So we'll wrap it up here for now and have Robot Richard send it out. But it's been a fun time with you guys, just chatting about goals, and I hope this podcast helped a bunch of people out there and will for years to come, because I think it was pretty well rounded. All right, Robot Richard, send us out.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's episode of Crowdfunding Nerds. For more resources, articles, and to listen to past podcasts, please visit us at crowdfundingnerds.com. And if you have a crowdfunding question, we also have a page on our site where you can send a message directly to us. Please visit crowdfundingnerds.com/question. And if your question is a great question, we may include it in a future podcast. Thank you all again for listening to this week's episode, and we'll see you next week. Stay nerdy.